My name is Amanda Gorman, and I am well known for being the inaugural Youth Poet Laureate of the United States, and my secret wish is to be more well known for the work I do empowering young students through literacy.
Welcome to 1440 Life Inside Out. I'm Peggy Callahan, and I cannot wait for you to hear Amanda Gorman's story in her own words. You may have seen Oprah celebrate Amanda's recent graduation from Harvard, or on stage at South by Southwest, sharing her poetry on CBS, maybe hanging with Michelle Obama or Hillary Clinton. This young powerhouse and her poetry get around. If you've seen her, you get what all the buzz and praise is about. You know she's short in stature, with a mighty intellect and a giant spirit that fuels her activism and her fierce poetry. It's easy to believe Amanda when she says she plans to be president in 2036. But first up, she has a few book deadlines, and she wants to spend more time on the youth literacy organization she started when she was just 16 years old. Amanda, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to have such a comfy interview to do over winter break. Usually I'm running over the place, so this is great.
I have a feeling you could have done anything you wanted. Why poetry?
That's a question I get asked a lot, and I'm not sure if I have the perfect answer for it. I think the reason that I'm continuously drawn to poetry as a form of communication is that it inherently asks you to learn the rules of language and then to break them. It asks you to draw outside of the lines, to think differently about sound and text and form and grammar. And I think there's something inherently compelling about that task of picking up conventions and then turning them upside down, especially for me as someone who is an activist and an advocate and always thinking about ways to work within and outside of a system. Applying that eagerness to writing is something that's super powerful to me.
I asked Amanda to share one of her poems with us when she was communing with the Redwoods at 1440 Multiversity before heading back to Harvard for her final semester.
The poem I'm about to read is called What If, and I wrote it when I was going to be participating in a conference that Harvard was hosting called Dialogue. And I was very interested in what it means to have conversations with other people, to gather with other people, and to really spread ideas in a holistic manner. And I thought it might be timely, really thinking about 1440, because I feel like it is such a gathering place where ideas and people can all come together. What if? What if our world's leaders, innovators, and thinkers didn't speak about change in monologues? What if we spoke and hoped through dialogue? While dialogue is not the chorus speaking perfectly as one, dialogue is that daring cacophony, the diverse call to action. It is complex and sometimes chaotic conversation. It is courageous confrontation. It is the collective compassion for the common good. It is meeting with meaning, participation with purpose, speech in service of others. Here, by dialogue, we do not mean it in the abstract. We mean it in the act. It is a verb in every sense of the word. It is participating, communicating, activating, because we know something has to be done and fast. And though it might take years, change is worth a lifetime. Push by pull, back by forth. We might not get the correct answers, but we get closer to asking the right questions. What if our world's leaders, businesses, innovators, thinkers gathered together? What if we could look in each other's eyes, not for press or publicity, but for progress? Then we, the assembled, would act with these words at our prow. If past is written in prologue, or progress will be spoken in dialogue, dialogue as verb, vocation, a vow, to not only ask what if, but also what now.
So I know that your poetry inspires others. Does it inspire you?
Oh, I've never been asked that question before. I would say yes, in a very humble way. And what I mean by that is there's often moments when maybe for some reason I'm feeling particularly depressed or sad, or when I'm feeling sick or weak. And in those dark moments, I might pull up a video of myself performing on stage to kind of remind myself I have a capacity to kind of hold my body and hold this space in this way, even if in this moment I'm not feeling like my best self.
And what other writers inspire you?
Oh, so there's so many. It's so difficult to choose. I'm always adding a new writer to my list. For forever, I've loved Maya Angelou just as a human being and what she was able to do with writing. Toni Morrison, the late, great. James Baldwin. I love Yusef Komunyakaa, Sonia Sanchez. I would just say kind of the whole gamut of, I would especially say the Black writerly tradition is incredibly inspiring to me.
Is there a through line with all of these writers? Is it what they're writing about? Is it their style? Is it the place they come from?
One of the threads that I think is most resonant in my life is the thread of seeing writing as an instrument for change. So not just writing to write something, but writing to make something right. Whether it's Toni Morrison trying to fill in the gap where you don't see kind of holistic three-dimensional Black characters, whether it's Maya Angelou bringing this type of confidence and feminine voice to poetry to talk about women's issues, which is really world issues. Audre Lorde kind of using her incredibly intelligent, brilliant, poetic voice to talk about Black feminism. I think that is the through line.
Can you tell us about your childhood and your family growing up?
I was raised by a single mother along with my twin sister and our dog Lulu, who we love to death. And we were just always trying to be kind of our most creative selves in the space that was allotted to us. So my poor mother, we'd be in this small apartment unit, but she would kind of just say, you can do whatever you want with the space, just kind of don't blow up the house, which is actually a really high ask for me because there were at least 3 times I distinctly remember I almost set the place on fire. But she would let us throw plays and, do musicals and build forts to just try to do as much as we could with, I would say, our own creative entertainment. I remember my mom used to have to pay me a quarter when I was around 6 or 7 for every day I stayed in bed rather than waking up before 4 a.m. in the morning. She needed to sleep, so she was like, you can write, but, just try to keep daytime hours. So it's because of her I'm not entirely nocturnal.
Amanda Gorman describes herself growing up in Los Angeles as a weird child with a speech impediment.
I guess you could say the world I was dropped into. I was skinny, I was small, I was weak, I was Black, I was a female, had a speech impediment. So just kind of on the physical phenotypic level, the world makes it very clear. You have a disability. You're a woman. You're a person of color. You are on the outs. There were certain letters in the alphabet that were incredibly difficult for me to say. And so speaking up was already frustrating beyond measure. And I remember distinctly around 3rd grade kind of writing my ideas down and realizing that the voice I was hearing when I was picking up a pen, or the voice I was hearing even when I was reading a book in my head where you can hear the sounds, sounded so different from what I sounded to the people around me that I'd kind of found out this different dimension of voice that I had that was separate and distinct from what I might sound like orally. And I think that was a huge placement of power for me.
What were you hearing that you thought was so different from what other people were hearing?
Well, I think on one level it was when I'm speaking aloud as Amanda Gorman, I'm not saying my R's, I'm not saying shh, I'm not saying ch. But when I'm writing it down and when I'm reading it, I'm hearing a voice that is eloquent, that is moving through those words seamlessly, and that understands those powers. And so there was a kind of, I think, mismatch between what I sounded like and what my stream of consciousness sounded like in my own head. So one story that my family talks about a lot is so many people thought I was mentally challenged growing up just because I wasn't able to say completely what my thoughts were. So we were in class, and I think for some reason I kept saying, what is a skeleton? What is a skeleton? And my teachers were so worried. They're like, everybody in the class knows what a skeleton is. They've seen it on Halloween things. Amanda, for some reason has no idea what this basic thing is. And what I was really trying to say was, what is the biological material that makes bones in the skeletal system possible? But I couldn't get that out, so I just shortened it to what is a skeleton. And so there was this incredible disparity between what was being heard from what I was saying and actually what was going on behind the lake and underneath the ripples. And so when I figured out that a way to ask the question, a way to have a voice, a way to show that was through writing, that was an emancipatory moment for me in my life. I'm also someone who feels very old, but I look very young. And so there were all these kind of levels of things that made me feel so racially, sexually, spiritually distinct, and not a lot of bridges that were being drawn for me. And so I always appreciate the people in my life, like my mother, like my teachers, who were saying all those things that make you feel different is what makes you exceptional. So I think that in itself shows my mom's brilliance, that she wasn't using this one little, I think, shortcoming as an emblem of a weakness. She actually recognized this is creating a type of strength in my daughter that I'm very proud of.
It seems as though fairly early on you were able to turn that around and say, this felt difficult. I may have felt like an outsider, or I may not have felt seen and heard out in the greater world, but I now see the gift of that.
Right. I think that's 100% true. I'm definitely at a phase in my life where I'm able to recognize my speech impediment as my greatest speech opportunity. It's so interesting now because I talk with people and they say, you're so eloquent, the way you pronounce these words, your diction, yada, yada, yada. And I kind of look at them and they have no idea the work that had to be put into that over decades, trying to say my own name. I remember getting into Harvard and practicing that night over and over again, saying Harvard, because I still couldn't really say it. I was born as someone who had a speech impediment, and I had to become someone who was able to take that up as my life's mission. That's also another reason I look up to Maya Angelou, because she was me growing up after she was sexually assaulted. And she too used poetry as this type of bridge to become kind of the orator and the voice that she wanted to be. Even, it's phenomenal, Martin Luther King Jr. did not do very well in public speaking in college, and you can actually look at his transcript, and he got a really bad grade, and then he gives the most electrifying speeches. And so I think it goes to show that sometimes what feels like walls are actually stepping stones to something greater.
What's the most difficult lesson you've learned so far?
I think that people a lot of times say you can't do it all. What I've learned, it's more so you can't do it all the time. Meaning that, say in my life, I want to be a poet, I want to be a creator, I want to be a student, I want to be a sister, I want to be an activist. All of those are kind of possible in the large spectrum of my life and who I can be, but they might not be possible to embody holistically together at every single time moment. And so I think that's a lesson that I learned, because if you're trying to be all of yourself all the time, you're going to be none of yourself for the whole time. But if I figure out kind of what is the next indicated step, meaning I kind of close my eyes and think, what can I do here in this place now in this moment? I think that's a much more empowering and freeing way to think about it.
How did you develop your own voice?
That's such an interesting question, because I actually think that a lot, especially as I write my own books. How do I keep myself informed while also not constraining myself to kind of the limits that I'm seeing? And I think it lies in the difference between emulation and imitation. So imitation, kind of the Latin root, it's very much so about image and what you see. Emulation is about rivalry. And rivalry we tend to think about kind of as an antagonism, as kind of opponents. But it's really kind of what we're talking about, end states. Rivalry is more so about seeing someone accomplish something and wanting to kind of elevate yourself to position in which you can add another stone to that mountain. Imitation is kind of trying to reflect your image off of what you see around you, if that necessarily makes sense. And so as I write, I think less so, how do I become a writer that looks and sounds and acts like the writers around me, but more so, how do I live a life in which I can stare up at the greatest titans of literature and say, I still have a little stone to add. That's rivalry. And that's something I think about, of kind of pushing against, I guess you could say, the white Western male canon of literature. I want to be that rival. I want to be kind of the warrior who is saying that literature is great, but there can be literature that is just as, if not more sophisticated, which is coming from voices that have been unheard kind of for the test of time. And so that's the type of emulation I'm interested in, not necessarily imitation of trying to become Milton. I want to kind of beckon Milton forward and say, this is who you forgot and this is who should be heard.
You used to read things 3 times.
Oh, you've done your research.
I had a really great researcher help.
So the first time I read it, it's for pleasure. The second time I read it, I tend to take notes about what the author is doing very well. And then the third time I read it, I take notes of what I could do better and how I would change it. Maybe even not, if it's not necessarily better, how would this flow in kind of Amanda's voice? And it's, again, that difference between imitation and emulation.
Are there times when you are feeling less than you? Mm-hmm. So one of the things that this podcast is about is those moments when you don't know if you're having a breakdown or a breakthrough, right? When and you don't know if everything's going to take off or just crash and burn, and you can't know. Yeah. But it can be paralyzing. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I mean, I have those moments every day. Literally, I think writing is a continuous breakdown, build up process where you're staring at this blank piece of paper and trying to will something great to be born. So for me, something I try to practice is what I call literary mantras, which are just kind of, I guess you could say, phrases that you create from yourself to kind of solidify your spirit in times of need. And so mine goes, I'm the daughter of Black writers. We're descended from freedom fighters who broke their chains and changed the world. They call me. And so I say that whenever I'm about to write a poem, whenever I'm going to go on stage. And there's been times when literally I'm about to have a nervous breakdown before I go on stage. And I say that and I go do my thing. And, I might mess up. My speech impediment might come through. A whole horde of chaos might break out. But I know who I am. And I know I'm going to be that same person when I walk back off stage. And that's all that matters.
Wise woman, poet, activist, 21-year-old Amanda Gorman.